It's time for another Mailbag Friday, so let's answer some questions from the listeners.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB to win $50 instantly when you play $5 over at PrizePicks today. Well, as you always know, when it comes to Friday, it is basically dedicated to the listeners out there. Any questions you guys may have, send them my way to either YouTube, our YouTube channel that is, or to my Twitter handle at JohnnyJ_15. So let's kick things off with question number one. This comes from Kian. I am coming from an outsider perspective for the Royals, but at least with the regular season almost over and reflecting on their offseason moves, why do you think they decided to finally spend this recent offseason versus other times? Is it the ballpark situation and Bobby Witt Jr.'s potential? And if I'm allowed a second question, how would you describe the profile of this ownership and or management? As in, they are not cheap, as not as the Pirates. Do they spend a lot in the draft like Cleveland? Are they smart as Tampa? But they are not Moreno, Angels, or Reisendorf, White Sox. Awful. Wonder how you would describe the ownership and or management. So we'll start with why they spent money. I think last year was a little bit of a breaking point, but they also looked at 2024 as a year they were going to try to be more competitive. John Sherman and JJ Picollo decided they needed to have an evaluation year where they could figure out who actually was a part of the future. Once they got that, John Sherman was willing to invest money into this team and let JJ Picollo play around with that money and see which guys he could bring in to build a contender. I think they'd always envisioned that type of timeline of spending money. And with the lottery system, it didn't make sense to tank anymore. Why would you go through another 100-loss season if you were able to spend money? Because there's no guarantee, even if you lose 130 games like the White Sox, that you can get the number one overall pick. You'll have the best odds, but they're just odds. So to me, JJ Picollo and John Sherman wanted to show the fan base they were willing to invest in this team, spend money, and fortunately for them, it really worked out. And where I would probably categorize them, I mean, it is only 1 year. I want to see what they'll do this upcoming offseason after likely making the postseason. I put them somewhere in the middle. John Sherman still has to show a little bit more, but he's certainly not a poor owner that is crying poor and not wanting to spend money on the team, because we saw that firsthand just how much money they were willing to invest in the Royals. But good question there. Next question on YouTube is going to be coming from Logan. Do you believe the Royals dropped the ball with Evan Sisk this season? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, to be postseason eligible, you have to be on the 40-man roster before September. I'm not saying Sisk would have been a bona fide beast, but why waste the roster spot with Bolin and Serpa? I'm dying to know what analytics the Royals have to justify to not have Sisk replace anybody. He's 27 years old. What do they have to lose? I get he's another lefty, but righty-righty matchups and pure stuff is irrelevant if you can't locate. Well, as I said in one of our episodes earlier this week, the Royals evaluate these guys every single day. They have had tabs on Evan Sisk, and I probably put him in the same category as Walter Pennington. That Walter Pennington had incredible numbers, but the Royals never viewed him as a major league piece, or at least a guy that was going to come up and fix the bullpen. They know what some guys have, and they know which guys can translate that to the big league level. They're not 100% right all the time, and I would have loved to see Evan Sisk get a chance, but they made their choice once Angel Serpa went down to give Daniel Lynch that shot again, because he has pitched at the big league level. They thought that he could have improvement. He has done that so far since coming back up from Omaha. And I think Evan Sisk could be a potential piece next year, but he's also 27 years old in AAA for a reason. I think they feel like either the command won't translate to the big league level or the swing and miss stuff won't translate either. So to me, these guys evaluate them over and over again. I know the guy that works in the analytics department. He was down there in spring training. they have the numbers and the data on these guys. And again, I would be fascinated to know what doesn't translate well, but there's always a reason why those guys are not getting chances in Kansas City. They aren't just looking at the box scores and the strikeout numbers and the ERA. There's a lot more that goes into it, but I'm sure you did know that. I'm just simply pointing out that there's more reasons why Evan Sisk is not in Kansas City and why guys like Serpa and Will Smith and Daniel Lynch got chances as a lefty in the Royals bullpen and not him. Next one on YouTube is going to come from, looks like, I believe we still have one more here for Mailbag on YouTube. Maybe not as many as I thought. Okay, this one comes from Cole. How much do you trust, or how much trust do you have on this offense in the postseason? A follow-up question is, do you think Bobby will win the MVP? Well, I'll get the Bobby argument out of the way. I do not. I think Aaron Judge is going to win it. It's just had that feel now for the last couple of weeks. And as for a trust in the offense, it's tough to tell because the postseason is just a completely different world. It's a different beast. You don't really know what versions of guys you're going to get. Are they going to crumble under the pressure? They're going to be playing in front of sold-out crowds on the road. If they do get a home game at Kauffman Stadium, there's the added pressure there. I do think I've got faith in this offense. I don't think there'll be a game-wrecking crew. I don't think there'll be a demolition derby, if you will, and just smoking every single top arm they face, because that's the difference in the postseason. You're getting the best of the best. There's no, spot starter guy there. There's no 4A guy that's coming up to replace somebody in the rotation. You're getting the best of the best every single time out. So I do think it'll be a struggle for them, but I think they've got the guys in there that still can get hot at the right time. So I do have confidence, but I don't think they're going to be winning postseason games in shootouts, we'll call them, or just, 10 to 11 games. I think they're going to have to win almost every single postseason game on the back of their starting rotation. Okay, let's see if we've got any more questions here on YouTube. One more here from Drew, and then I believe, depending how long it takes us for answer, we'll move on to our next segment. You think Vinny makes an appearance as a DH in the postseason and Salvi continues playing first? I just am not counting on Vinny Pasquantino to be back in the postseason. If it lined up, I believe he could return at some point in the ALCS, but first things first, you got to win a series. And even if they do get to the ALCS, how long is that rehab process, or what is that rehab process going to look like? So I'm just not counting on it at this point. I think Salvi's going to be a first baseman. I think Yuli Gurriel would get some starts in the postseason because he's got experience over there. But I wouldn't be worried right now on when Vinny can return, because he's just got to get healthy first thing first and make sure that rehab process goes smoothly. So right now, I'm just not too concerned with where Vinny would be once he gets back in the lineup, because it's a long shot at this point he can get back into the lineup. Okay, we're going to jump over to X here. This question comes from Alex. Should the Royals move Alec Marsh to the bullpen before the playoffs so he gets used to it? I have thought about this. Once Michael Lorenzen comes back, I believe sometime next week, I think he'll go to the rotation. And that would come down to, do the Royals want a six-man rotation, or do they want Alec Marsh to get some work out of the bullpen? It wouldn't shock me if Alec Marsh goes to the bullpen, but if he throws well tonight in Pittsburgh, it's going to be hard to justify moving him back to the bullpen, even if it is for postseason work, because Brady Singer's not going to be moved to the postseason to get acclimated there. Neither will Michael Lorenzen. So I think they'll keep Marsh in the rotation as the sixth guy to start every sixth day. But once the postseason rolls around, he's just going to have to adjust then. I think Alec Marsh, because he's had a different role in AAA and then came back up to start some games, I do think he'll be able to get used to it sooner rather than later in October. John asked, is it possible that 2003 is here again? I believe I've gotten this before. No, I don't think this is like the 2003 season. It was pretty much done at this point back in 2003. And also, that was a group that just didn't have any pitching. It's a complete polar opposite team. And the 2003 squad got off to a really hot start, but then immediately started tailing off in the second half. It wasn't really a competitive September, if I can recall correctly. So, John, if you're worried about a collapse happening, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but they've got a 5-game lead for a playoff spot with 15 games to go. They've been in a comfortable playoff spot for the better part of 2 months now. So, no, I do not think that it's going to be 2003 all over again. And let's get to one more here before our break. Drew asked, do you think Vinny comes back in the postseason? Yeah, I already kind of touched on this a little bit. Not your fault. Just somebody on YouTube had asked it before I got to this question. I'm hopeful for Vinny. Vinny's hopeful, and he's an optimistic guy. I think he so badly wants to be out there, but the timeline just doesn't match up with what I think is realistic. I mean, the Royals need to focus on winning 2 series before they'd even have a remote chance of getting Vinny Pasquantino back. So right now, I'm going to say no. I do not think that Vinny returns for the postseason. Okay, let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, still plenty more questions to get into next in this edition of Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor in Tonal. Tonal is the world's smartest and most effective strength training system that helps you get stronger, and it's powered by AI. Tonal learns with every rep so it can deliver workouts personalized just for you. It also learns from your movement and provides suggested weight recommendations for every move with detailed progress reports. They even create personalized program and workout suggestions or recommendations based on your individual goals. It's just like having a personal trainer at home with you, as Tonal will optimize every workout just for you. And unlike traditional gym equipment, Tonal uses adaptive digital weight to advance your training techniques. Right now, Tonal is offering our listeners $200 off for your Tonal purchase with promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Tonal.com and use promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $200 off on your purchase. That's Tonal.com and promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $200 off. We're going to jump back over to Twitter and get to our next question from Dominic. Is Will Smith the really lucky charm he seems to be? I mean, you can't deny the logic there, because he's been to a lot of World Series, and this would be, his third straight or his fourth straight? What I will say about Will Smith, even though the numbers have not been where he wanted them to be this year, there is no 2024 Royals without Will Smith. And I believe I've told this story before. I'll tell it again. When Will Smith got signed to Kansas City, he immediately went to assistant GM Scott Sharp, I believe it was, and said, who do you want me to get? Who do you want me to reach out to? Kind of playing the recruiter and bringing in Seth Lugo, bringing in Michael Walker, bringing in a lot of these guys. And I think that's a big reason as to why he stuck around and still is around for the majority of this year. They never thought about releasing him or DFAing him, nothing like that, because he was really respected in the clubhouse. And he's a big reason as to why some of those better free agents came into Kansas City and thrived. So, yes, I do say to that point, a little bit of lucky charm in there. And also a really respected guy in the clubhouse, respected in the organization, and was a great recruiter in the offseason and bringing in some of those top free agents. Next question comes from Caleb. Do you think Will Smith will be on the playoff roster if healthy? So back-to-back Will Smith questions. It's a good point. It basically comes down to, A, is he healthy? I mean, that's the obvious point here. But what Daniel Lynch looks like going into the postseason. I think Daniel Lynch has a spot at this point in time. I think you have to get a little bit more creative with your bullpen, because Alec Marsh, Michael Lorenzen, and Brady Singer go to the bullpen. Do you take Carlos Hernandez off and put Will Smith back on it? So maybe it's a scenario in which they leave him off the playoff roster because he's not healthy. You got guys that are pitching better than Will Smith was before the injury, and we haven't really heard too much of an update on it. So at this point in time, with the information we have, I do not expect him to be on the postseason roster. Charles asked, who is in your current bullpen circle of trust? I think it is 3 guys, maybe 4. Lucas Erceg, of course, he's firmly in the circle of trust. Chris Bubich is there as well. And then I would say it's Sam Long and John Schreiber. I would like to put Daniel Lynch on there, but that feels like recency bias. Just because John Schreiber and Sam Long, the numbers haven't been phenomenal all year long. Sam Long's numbers better than Schreiber's, but John Schreiber's been an 8th inning guy before. It's not going to be perfect every single time out, but when those guys come out of the bullpen, I do have a little bit of confidence there. I think that they can get the job done. But if I was really being firm about my decisions and not just letting a couple guys in because they've done it this year, I would say there are 2, and it's Lucas Erceg and it's Chris Bubich. I don't think the circle of trust can be as big as most people want it to be. It's guys that you think can go out there in a 1-run game on the road, especially in the postseason, and get outs in a crucial spot. And to me, there's 2 guys right now, and that would be Erceg and that would be Chris Bubich. This one comes from CWAA. Is there any real chance of Vinny returning for the possible wildcard ALDS series? Again, a lot of Vinny questions today. I don't blame you, because you're hopeful that Vinny can get healthy in time. If he does return, I would expect it to be the ALCS or the World Series. And again, that's putting the cart in front of the horse here. First course of action needs to be getting into the postseason. After that, it's winning a postseason series. Then would be winning another postseason series. Then you can worry about if you're getting Vinny back or not. But to me, No, I would put it very, very low that his appearance would happen in the wild card of the ALDS series because he got hurt. Let's see, that was back on Thursday, August 29th. It was a 6 to 8 week timeline. So let's use best case scenario 6 weeks. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, next Tuesday, or excuse me, that would be 3 Thursdays from now, I think, is when the playoff game, the first game of the wild card series would happen. So that's roughly 5 weeks, and then 6 weeks would be the next round. And that's pushing it. I mean, that's the best case scenario, 6 weeks. If it's 8 weeks, you're looking at October 24th, and that's the end of the ALCS and right before the beginning of the World Series. So, no, I'd give it virtually no chance that he could return at that point in time. Michael asked, why not bring up Bolin in September and see what he can do against big league hitters out of the bullpen? Send down MacArthur, Hernandez. Thanks, Jack, and let's go Royals. I do think James MacArthur is going to stay in this bullpen, and I'd imagine James MacArthur is going to be on the postseason roster. So anybody that thinks he's getting sent down, I would just reevaluate what the Royals front office has done in the past. They're not going to look at one implosion of James MacArthur and think that he can't be on the postseason roster. And honestly, Carlos Hernandez has done well since returning. And Carlos Hernandez and Jonathan Bowen have similar stuff. I'd rather take Carlos in that spot because of the big league experience. And Jonathan Bowen's pitched once this year at the big league level. It was in a spot start in Toronto, and it didn't go so well. In a year where they're not competing for the postseason, absolutely. I say give Jonathan Bowen a chance. But Jonathan Bowen's not going to be on this postseason roster. I don't think Jonathan Bowen is going to be appearing back in Kansas City anytime soon, at least the end of this year, postseason. Next year, you can look to maybe Jonathan Bowen winning a job out of spring training. Waka Season asks, realistically, is there a chance we lock up a wild card spot as early as next Friday? In my opinion, need 2 of 3 in Pittsburgh and 2 of 3 against Detroit at home, if not a sweep there. Feel like that would drop the magic number quite a bit, especially with the Tigers losing. I think the way I map this out, because I know a lot of people are going to be asking about this because that matters, it being at home, maybe being able to clinch a playoff spot at Kauffman Stadium. To me, though, I think I've circled that national series because the magic number is 11 games, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it is 10 games now because, yeah, it is 10 games, the magic number to clinch a postseason spot. You probably need to sweep both Pittsburgh and Detroit to have a really good chance at that. And that would mean Detroit getting swept by Baltimore and then Kansas City taking care of business there. Maybe they could sweep one of those teams and then 2 of 3. So it's possible. I'm not going to rule that out. I think I've circled that Giants series and the National series, really the 2 that I think they'd clinch a postseason berth at. If I was to put money on it, of course, it could always happen in Atlanta if things don't go so well. But to me, there is a realistic chance. It's just going to take Kansas City getting really hot here in the next 2 series and Detroit or Boston or Seattle getting really, really cold because you got to factor that in too. Not only does Detroit have to play poorly, Boston and Seattle have to play poorly as well. Bobbert Witt asks, rather play the Yankees or the Orioles, also give a postseason lineup. I think I'd rather play Baltimore here. Baltimore hasn't had the best second half. I think that the rotation is a little bit interchangeable with New York's, probably a little bit better, but I don't want to face 2 MVP candidates back-to-back in that lineup. I don't care what the bottom of the lineup looks like for New York. Going to Yankee Stadium for a Yankees team that is World Series or bust, I don't think I'd want to face Juan Soto and Aaron Judge in the postseason. For Baltimore, you got to go through Gunnar Henderson, but Gunnar Henderson's been a different guy in the second half. Adley Rutschman's been a different guy in the second half. And I think the Royals played well against Baltimore this year, unlike the New York Yankees series. I think that's a favorable matchup. I could always eat my words and it could bite me in the ass, but to me, I think the Orioles are who you'd want there. Now, the Orioles are kind of World Series or bust too because they got swept in the first round last year by Texas after winning 100 games. I don't think they're going to get to 100 wins this year, but they got to get further than the wild card series. And the Royals are a team that gives them a little bit of nightmares back in 2014 when that team got knocked out in 4 games of the ALCS. So, yeah, I think I'll take Baltimore over New York there. As for the lineup, I think it'll be Tommy Pham in left field. It'll be Bobby Witt Jr. second at short. I think it would be Salvi hitting third. He'll do the catching. Then it'll be Massey hitting fourth at second base. Renfroe would be fifth. He'd be in right field. Sixth would be let's say Freddie Fermin at DH, or you could flop Salvi and Freddie, but I think they're going to let Salvi catch in a postseason game. So let's say Freddie's the DH there at 6. In the 7 hole, I think it would be running out of people here. I think the 7 hole would be Garcia, right? Playing third base. I think Garcia would be there. Hitting 8th would be, well, I got Kyle Isbell hitting 9th. I'm missing a spot here. So you have Bobby at short, Massey at 2nd, Salvi. I don't think I had anybody at first. Yeah, so first base would be what I'm missing there. I think you could see Yuli Gurriel. Maybe you go Gurriel 7, Garcia 8, and then I think Kyle Isbell 9th. I think that would make the most sense. Or you could always have that approach of Paul DeYoung is going to play third base. You'd have Massey DHing, and then Garcia's playing second, and then Salvi can play first, and Freddie can catch. So a little bit of a combination there. It's tough to tell now because it feels like they change positions every single time. But I do think you can count on Tommy Pham starting, count on Bobby Witt Jr. starting, Salvi starting, Massey starting. And then I think that would basically be what I could tell you right now. 4 or 5 guys that for sure would be starting, and then it's kind of a toss-up for the rest of it. Kyle Isbell will be starting. So there you go. There's the 5th or the 6th guy in the lineup there. But I'll probably have a better gauge once we get closer to that final week of the season there. But I do love the question. I'm sure I'll get a lot of those coming up in, the next couple weeks or so. Okay, let's take our final break of the show, but we want to thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast as host Pat Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, we'll wrap up this edition of Mailbag Friday. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our title sponsor in PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Now, PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you can get your money in as quick as 15 minutes. PrizePicks also invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money, and even if one of your picks doesn't hit. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And let's run through our last little bit of questions on Twitter in this edition of a Mailbag Friday. And if I missed anybody or you asked it way, way early in the week and I didn't get a chance to get to it, just direct message me on Twitter and I'll be able to answer them in no time there. But that's probably one thing I will say moving forward about Mailbag Fridays. If you ask me on Saturday for the following Friday, it kind of gets lost in a lot of the questions, a lot of the notifications that I get. But I do want to make sure I answer the question. So if you did send in the question, you didn't hear it in this episode, just direct message me and I'll try to answer it as soon as possible. Beans asked, what current or former Royal do you think would make a good manager? I've always believed that James Shields could be a really good manager, mainly because he's a fiery guy, a competitive guy. He was there in surprise in spring training, being able to be around the players, and a lot of the guys gravitated toward him. I think he would be somebody that, yes, would be intense, but if you like that intensity, I think it could work out. But also with catchers, I think that's, the difference there. Catchers usually make good managers. A lot of former catchers turn into managers because they have to work with pitchers, they're calling games, all that type of stuff. So somebody like Drew Butera, maybe Drew Butera is on the White Sox organization, so that really doesn't help his case in a year like this. But I think he could get a chance if the White Sox get some form of success in the near future, or maybe, he could take over here in a couple of years, depending on how the next White Sox manager does. I don't think Grady Sizemore is going to be the guy, but always look to former catchers. I think those could be good picks. I do think you also could look to, I did have a conversation, or actually an interview at that, with Billy Butler. And Billy Butler's still a big baseball guy. And he did help out coaching. I think it was in Idaho Falls when they were the Royals minor league affiliate, was helping out there a few years back. I think he can be around the game. And I don't know if he'd want to do something like that, but I would love to see him get like a hitting coach role somewhere in the minor leagues and maybe work his way up to the big league level. But there are some guys that I think would fit well. But when you're looking at former Royals, go to catchers. Catchers would always be able to make good managers. And then Raul Ibanez, if he didn't want to work for MLB anymore and get a shot at managing somebody, I thought he was going to be a candidate for the Royals at one point in time. But he is somebody that I think could make a pretty damn good manager there. So that would be my answer on former Royals that would make good managers around baseball. Ben asked, are you starting Reagans or Lugo game one? Also, should they use Singer or Lorenzen in the pen in October? I'm starting Reagans game one, Lugo game two, Walker in game three. And then, yes, I would put Brady Singer, Michael Lorenzen, and Alec Marsh all in the bullpen there. That's a decision I'm not going to waver on too much. Cole Reagans is the ace of this team, even though Seth Lugo's been really good this year, has had better numbers than Cole Reagans in numerous spots. Seth Lugo's the number two of this rotation, and Cole Reagans is your ace. He was your opening day starter, and he would be your game one starter in a wild card series. Or if you win the division, game one of the ALDS. Aiden asks, do you see JJ Picollo still being aggressive in the offseason, or do you see him being okay with the current roster? Well, a lot of guys are going to be coming back next year, but I still think they're going to be aggressive. There are holes to fill on this team. We touched on that in yesterday's podcast episode, and I think that if John Sherman gives him a little bit more money to work with, you can build up that bullpen again. You can go after another corner outfield bat. A lot of the same holes that last year's team had are still around. It will be around for the offseason of 2024. You did fix the rotation. A lot of your rotation is coming back unless Michael Wacha opts out and Brady Singer moves on. But I do think you're going to maintain a lot of the rotation from next year, a lot of the bullpen guys, and a lot of your lineup. So I do think they're going to be aggressive, but you can probably put more money into one or two players, unlike last year where they had to spread it around to a lot of different guys. Brody's question is, do you still believe Wacha won't opt out? So that's fitting that we just talked about Michael Wacha. Last time you thought he would opt out, and I believe he would because I felt back then even more know someone will give him 3 years, 55 to 60 million, which is more than 16 million guaranteed next year. I think somebody could offer him. It really comes down to Michael Wacha. Does he believe with the pitching market he can get a deal like that? And I would simply bring up last year, what do you think Jordan Montgomery thought once he hit free agency? What do you think Blake Snell thought once he hit free agency? Neither of those guys got the deal they wanted. So I think starting pitchers this go around, even if their agent isn't Scott Boras, you look at what happened last year. You go in expecting to get 18 or 19 million, you don't get it. Michael Wacha's on the wrong side of 30, or not really the wrong side of 30, because I would say that's after 35, but he's nearing his mid-30s. I don't think many people are going to give him a 3-year deal. They could, a desperate team could, but I just think right now that Michael Wacha wants to return. I think he'll be satisfied with what he's making, unless he goes on an unbelievable tear in the postseason, and then somebody would fork over $20 million next season. Maybe somebody like Detroit, who looks at what the Royals did and said, hey, they went out there and spent money, got more consistency in the rotation, and look where it led him. And I could see that certainly happening, but I do think he'll need to have a strong postseason to get more money than what his contract would indicate, assuming he accepted the player option. And lastly, Jeff asks, I see David Lesky's tweet earlier about if we win at least one game each of the next 5 series, the Tigers would have to go 11-4. How many games do you think we win the rest of the way? Sorry for the long-winded question. No worries at all, Jeff. I do think 88's the goal. So 8-7. I think if you win 88 games, you don't even need to worry about what anybody else is doing. Getting to 88 games should be doable. They'll have some favorable matchups, and that's the number that I've put in my head for about the last month and a half. You get to 88 wins, you should be just fine at getting into October, and probably just fine and holding on to that second wild card spot. But that also means Minnesota would have to play sub 500 ball or right at 500 ball to hold on to that spot. So going 8-7, I think the Twins would have to go 10-5. Yeah, I think they'd have to go 10-5. They do have the tiebreaker over Kansas City, and the Royals have a 1.5 lead on them as we speak. Okay, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for all your questions, and I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me at JohnnyJ_15 and find us on wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On MLB podcast and prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully. who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You enjoy the weekend, and we will talk to you on Monday recapping all of this Royals and Pirates series. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.